Yes. I, I think you alluded earlier. The chapter that I loved the most, that I thought was just breathtaking, was the chapter called Delirium, and that one was so spectacular because Brush Cubas says that he knows that when you die, your whole life flashes before you. But what flashes before him is the entire life of the human race. And that's an incredibly transformative vision that he had. And I just thought that was a spectacularly written chapter. It just took my breath away. And then it also made me think back at having read that the author had epilepsy. And I wondered to what extent his experience with epileptic seizures might have influenced his thought patterns or his life. For example, people who have petit mal epilepsy seizures may look around in their visual field and see objects, but not understand what the meaning of those objects have. In other words, you may see a chair and you may see it as a form without a meaning. What is the chair for? What does it do? What is its purpose? You don't know. You see forms without meaning. And I'm wondering if this switch in his mind also freed up things in his thinking and we see it in his writing. That's my only point.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, the delirium is really where Machado knocked my socks off, and I think the point at which the book really shows its true colors and starts showing off as well. So that was one of the chapters that really made me sweat blood because it has such a particular rhythm and such, it's rushing and then it stops on a dime and being able to convey the grandeur, being able to convey that which he is already telling you is unconveyable. It's a thing that he saw and he can't describe, and then he's describing it in terms that are in turn very difficult to translate. Um, as for epilepsy, I mean, we know that many great and very different writers had different forms of epilepsy. I'm always hesitant to. It's funny. So you have Machado had already been writing for quite some time before publishing Brás, and when it emerges, it perplexes people very deeply, and there are all sorts of, there at the time there's sort of some polite wondering, and then there have been posterior attempts to try to understand what happened to Machado. Did he hit his head? Did he? There's this notion that perhaps he had a period right before during the composition where he was had eye problems, and he goes up into the mountains and he's alone with his wife and he has to dictate things to her, and how that might have influenced the novel. Um, and there, I think that all of these factors may, they undoubtedly shaped Machado, they undoubtedly shaped the novel. But a more interesting genealogy that's not purely medical is to look at not only his previous novels, which are much more sort of well behaved, much more normal, but at his crónicas and essays, which are, the sort of the daily exercise of writing, where he allows himself to really consistently go out on a limb with some really wonderful and off the wall turns of phrase and metaphors and sort of fantastical voyages. And they're texts that are harder to translate today because he's commenting on the news of, July 1880, say. But it's a space in which he's developing these fantastical voyages in this mature voice. And when you look at sort of the thrust of his work, it's much less of a, traditionally, in Brazilian schools, you'd learn there's Machado in the first phase where he's doing these conventional romantic novels, and then there's Machado in the second phase where, he pulls off the mask and, I am now I'm this crazy genius of Brazilian letters going to found a style unlike any other. And there's always a temptation to try to find a single rupture or a single event or a single cause or a single inspiration. And what I found inspiring. I think I'm very much influenced by the book that I translated that led me to translate Brás Cubas, which is João César's book. And he speaks of Machado as an operário das letras, a worker of letters, so a man who lives by letters. He made a living from writing, in addition to the civil service at a time when very few people could do that, and someone who's just relentlessly dedicated to this craft and working and reworking and testing scenarios and writing different short stories on similar themes and seeing how things play out, sort of creating these literary laboratories. And so I think there's much more perhaps method and persistence and just relentless dedication there than perhaps alchemy. I like that interpretation because it puts Machado and this sort of brilliance more between more within arm's reach of any one of us, perhaps. But that's just I went on a long I went on a fantastical voyage of my own. Thank you for that question.